that you and people in the White House are studying this idea of possibly before his term ends. No. Do you have any plans on doing that?
None whatsoever. Never did. The press runs away with things. No, I have no intention of firing him. I would like to see him be a little more active in terms of his idea to lower interest rates. This is a perfect time to lower interest rates. If he doesn't, is it the end? No, it's not. But it would be good timing. It could have taken place earlier. But no, I have no intention to fire.
On China, your press secretary has suggested that some progress is being made. Are negotiations actively underway? And do you agree with Secretary Bessent, who has suggested that the current standoff with China is not sustainable?
We're doing fine with China. We're doing fine with I think almost every country. Everybody wants to have involvement with the United States. As you know, we were losing $5 billion a day when during the Biden administration, during that last year, it was a horror show what they were doing on trade, $5 billion a day. And now we have it down to a very low number because we're getting 25% from the automobile industry, from autos. We're getting 25% for steel, 25% for aluminum, and we're getting the baseline of 10%. And think of it, we're losing almost $2 trillion on trade. And those days are gone. We're not going to do that again. We're not going to let that happen.
How do you negotiate with President Trump? He's unpredictable and makes wild threats to get his way.
These countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. Please, please, sir, make a deal.
Leaders are going out of their way to gain his approval.
I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir.
Many leaders have deployed flattery and pomp to get in with Trump.
Can I present a letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. That is really nice.
Britain put in months of effort with Trump's team, and in public, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has praised the president repeatedly. Despite tensions over Ukraine, relations appear cordial.
We have a very good chance at arriving at a very good deal.
Argentina's leader, Javier Milei, has gone even further. He's posted doctored images of them embracing.
I love him because he loves Trump. When he called, I took his call. Anybody that loves me, I like them.
But Argentina's exports, such as oil and farm products, are still being hurt by Trump's trade war. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also had mixed results so far.
The greatest friend Israel has ever had.
Despite some early wins, Netanyahu has failed to stop Trump from announcing direct talks with Iran, Israel's regional enemy. Others have gambled that Trump respects those who stand up to him.
中方必将奉陪到底。
China's leaders have retaliated firmly, thinking they can win a trade war with America. Chinese officials may be betting that America will be unable to bear the damage from Trump's tariffs. A third approach appears to be to say little in public, but lobby the Trump administration behind closed doors. Japan has taken this approach. It has held off on threats and retaliation so far, favoring negotiation with the president, and he seems happy with that.
Japan is coming here as we speak. They're in a plane flying, lots of them.
South Korea, Vietnam, and Italy have also lobbied the president.
I think the best way is that we simply speak frankly about the needs that every one of us has.
But beware, this approach sometimes only works if you speak to the man himself. The EU's Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security, Maros Sefcovic, spent hours talking with two of the president's advisors, Jameson Greer and Howard Lutnick, only to be told neither had the authority to cut a deal. Trump has ushered in a new era, one where trade with America may depend as much on personal ties as it does on policy. But whether it's flattery, defiance, or silence, nobody yet knows how to get the best terms from Donald Trump.
President Trump says tariffs on China won't stay where they are now for long.
145% is very high, and it won't be that high. It's not going to be that high. It'll come down substantially, but it won't be zero. It used to be zero. We were just destroyed. China was taking us for a ride, and just not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
And there's brand new reporting in the Wall Street Journal this morning, Bill, that the White House is considering drastically slashing tariffs on goods coming from China, potentially by as much as half, though the reporting indicates that a final decision from President Trump hasn't been made yet. But you just heard that soundbite from President Trump. It sounds like he was sort of signaling that that could happen, and now there's reporting to back it up. We've reached out to the White House to try to confirm it ourselves as well, but again, investors happy about that news.
I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice.
Well, that sounds like quite a climb down from President Trump compared to his previous very hardcore rhetoric and tactics towards China since he launched this trade war. I think many people, both inside and outside the Chinese government, would probably agree that without having to do anything, Beijing already seems to have the upper hand here, because in contrast to all the flip-flops and twists and turns from Washington, the Chinese have been standing their ground, saying they would fight this trade war to the very end, while not completely shutting a door for potential talks. They have been emphasizing they would not negotiate under any threats or pressure. Now, very interestingly, a deeply connected Chinese source told me just a few days ago that they would often notice President Trump sweet-talking about China, but only to have his cabinet members come out quickly to spew out these same hawkish or even hostile views towards China. And this source said, given Trump's total control over his people now, by not publicly rejecting these views, the president seemed to be condoning them. And that just runs counter to one of the three things they want to see from the White House before any trade talks could happen. And these things are sincerity, reciprocity, and most importantly, consistency.
We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process. We've engaged in an extraordinary amount of diplomacy, of on-the-ground work. We've really tried to understand things from the perspective of both the Ukrainians and the Russians. What do Ukrainians care the most about? What do the Russians care the most about? And I think that we've put together a very fair proposal. We're going to see if the Europeans, the Russians, and the Ukrainians are ultimately able to get this thing over the finish line. Again, I feel pretty optimistic about it. I think everybody has been negotiating in good faith, but it's now time, I think, to take, if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, the party saying, we're going to stop the killing, we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, and we're going to actually put in place the kind of long-term diplomatic settlement that hopefully will lead to long-term peace. I'm going to take one more question before the kids start banging on the airplane windows.
So just to clarify, so you want the current lines of war in the war in Ukraine to remain the same under your proposal?
No, I didn't say that. What I said is the current lines, somewhere close to them, is where you're ultimately, I think, going to draw the new lines in the conflict. Now, of course, that means the Ukrainians and the Russians are both going to have to give up some of the territory they currently own. There's going to have to be some territorial swaps. So I wouldn't say the exact lines, but we want the killing to stop. And the only way to really stop the killing is for the armies to both put down their weapons, to freeze this thing, and to get on with the business of actually building a better Russia and a better Ukraine. We're certainly invested in that effort. We hope the Russians and the Ukrainians will meet us halfway. Thank you, guys. See ya.
All right. Are you ready for a boring history lesson? Back in the 1770s, the founding fathers of this country, who were nobody's fools, created a government of checks and balances. They created an executive branch, the president, a legislative branch, the Congress, a judiciary, our federal court system, to keep a check on each other. What is happening now, in a way that is unprecedented, is Donald Trump is accumulating more and more power into his own hands. He is usurping the powers of Congress, challenging the courts, and doing things in a way that has never been done before in modern American history. This country is the longest standing democracy on earth. We cannot allow Trump to take us into authoritarianism. Together, we're going to fight back. We're going to maintain our democracy.
In terms of your question about how China can respond, I actually am pretty heartened by the fact that this time around, the Chinese response has been more moderate and calibrated, unlike last time, right? So they have, last time they really responded proportionally, but this time they have been very careful, they have been more selective. I think if I were the US government, I would seize the opportunity to reset the relationship with China, and China is showing its willingness to, I think, on other issues as well, to repair some of the relationship with Japan, with Europe, and with the United States. If there is a way to work out an agreement with China to get China to cooperate on other fronts, and then I would argue that the U.S. should permit more investments coming from China in the United States, relax some of the controls that Biden administration imposed. If next 4 years the two countries can work out a pragmatic working relationship rather than engaging in really strong rhetoric against each other, I think that's a huge plus.
What the United States is saying is completely unreasonable. Their logic is all over the place, and there's no consistency at all. However, when Japan negotiates with what they are saying, to be frank, it's akin to being extorted by a delinquent. If Japan gives in, thinking it's a negotiation or a deal, and compromises on its position, it sets a bad precedent as a customary practice. If you give money to someone extorting you, they'll just come back to extort you again. In the first place, even their equations are completely nonsensical. I wasn't good at math either, but if that equation appeared in a math test, it would definitely score 0. That's why, even though Minister Akazawa is serious and capable, there's a concern about whether it's okay for a serious person to handle this. Since they're not a straightforward opponent, they won't listen to straightforward reasoning. Even though all options were mentioned, you must never show compassion to an opponent who isn't straightforward. If you ease up on them, it will set a bad example. In any case, I hope we absolutely do not give in to America's extortion. This may sound harsh, but it really is extortion. If we comply with this, it will truly set a bad example. Truly. Minister Iwata, I know you might not have much time, but I highly recommend watching the documentary about Roy Cohn, the lawyer who mentored him, and the documentary about Mr. Trump. By watching those, I hope you can gain some insight into what kind of person Mr. Trump is. When you watch it, you really get a sense of, oh, this is the kind of person he is. During the tariff review, he was so relaxed that he went to his own golf course. It wasn't a decision made after much deliberation. He's really mocking the world. Well, you know, Minister Akazawa is a serious person, and Minister Iwaya is also a serious person. So if you approach that person seriously, you'll definitely just get taken advantage of. I believe that Minister Iwaya was quite spirited in his younger days, and I hope he remembers that. Even now, Minister Iwaya is full of energy, and I urge him to demonstrate that spirited nature in negotiations with the United States and to promise not to yield to any extortion. With that, I conclude my questions. Thank you very much.
Well, as you are already aware,
on the legal
the
side,
tariff
Title VI,
measures
which you
by
just
the
mentioned
United
there, which
States are
the Trump
changing
administration
rapidly.
is using as potentially a pretext for this funding freeze, is part of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And basically what it says is that institutions that receive federal funding from the government cannot discriminate on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And Judaism would fall in that category. The administration has been upfront about its disappointment in the way many universities have reacted in the wake of these pro-Palestinian issues coming to campus and how they are protecting Jewish students. And Harvard has admitted to some short failings in that regard. However, the letter rescinding the federal funding named that, but it also alluded to this air of entitlement that these institutions have. The administration really sees Harvard as emblematic of this sort of woke bastion of academic ideology. And they're demanding that Harvard root out this, these types of beliefs. And what it is it's really viewpoint discrimination. He wants to make Harvard Trump University. He wants to get in academics and students who have a more diverse range of viewpoints. But what that really means is sort of these anti-woke and non-liberal viewpoints.
Harvard is arguing that this is a trampling of the First Amendment. But wasn't Harvard also in negotiations with the Trump administration and things were kind of moving, and then now there are lawsuits?
Absolutely.
What turned?
Yeah, and you saw Columbia engaged in a real back and forth over this specific issue. Harvard now is really pushing back when it filed this lawsuit, and I will say they have really strong legal arguments, not only of which is based on the merits of this case, but the procedure by which Trump did this. I mean, this is classic Trump shoot first, aim later, not following any of the procedural safeguards enshrined statutorily in Title VI.
What does that mean?
So, Title VI requires that he inform the university that there be a potential voluntary amelioration of the issues, and that there's a hearing, a 30-day notice. I mean, all sorts of things.
There was a process.
Correct, a process. Right. But Harvard has a really strong case on the First Amendment issue. Viewpoint discrimination is illegal on the part of the government, and academics are academic institutions have even more protections in the First Amendment space. So Trump is really trying to get his viewpoint into Harvard, and it's really illegal.
US President Donald Trump seems intent on crashing the oil price. When he was on the campaign trail, he used to talk about really low gasoline prices of $1.87 a gallon as a beautiful number. That's equivalent to about $20 a barrel for crude. Then, since coming to office in January, $50 a barrel has emerged as an unofficial price target for the administration. His problem, however, was that he had relatively few levers to pull prices down that low, short of trying to suppress demand by tanking the global economy. Somewhat bizarrely, that appears to be what he's tried to do, with Brent, the global benchmark, falling below $60 a barrel for the first time in 4 years. Now, the irony of this whole situation is that there is actually very little evidence that lower oil prices would be good for the US economy. Trump's thinking seems to be based on the idea that lower oil prices would reduce costs for American consumers and help keep US inflation under control. Traditionally, America has benefited when oil prices have been low because it has always been a net importer of oil. However, that situation has changed over the past decade due to the massive growth in something called US shale. Now, this specific type of oil production, which really accelerated in the US in the early 2010s, has helped America emerge as the world's biggest oil producer. Last year, it exported 2 million barrels a day more than it imported. What that means is that $50 oil might be good for US consumers, but it would hurt the revenue that the sector generates for the US government. The bigger concern, though, is that many of the US shale producers that have driven this expansion over the past decade are only profitable at prices above $65 a barrel. So if oil prices fall significantly below that, what we're actually going to see is a reduction in US oil production. And now Donald Trump has said he has two objectives. He wants lower oil prices, but he also wants to grow US energy production by 3 million barrels a day of oil equivalent before 2028. The problem he has is that those two objectives aren't compatible, so something's going to have to give.
What have we learned this week about where power lies? Do you have a sense of whether it was kind of Donald Trump bowing to sort of the markets or more pressure from Elon Musk or people inside his inner circle in his decision to back down? And what do you make of those who, to my mind, somewhat extraordinarily seem to still claim there's method to his madness and this was all part of a master plan?
The method to his madness thing just does not survive contact with scrutiny at all. First of all, his supporters were saying, oh, well, this is all part of a master plan to boost US government bonds and bring down borrowing costs. And then borrowing costs exploded higher and they all kind of went quiet. Then you had people like the Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick saying this was all part of a great vision to have millions of Americans screwing tiny screws into iPhones in warehouses in the US. And this is part of the revival of US craftsmanship. And it's just like, what are you guys talking about? Like, really? And so now they're saying, oh, well, this is all part of the plan and this has been like expertly executed. I mean, I don't see it personally. But in terms of what it was that forced Trump's hand, again, no insight into the inner workings of his brain. He was out playing golf while the markets were bleeding out over the past few days. But, the markets people that I speak to, and I speak mostly to markets people, are like, yes, we did it. It's the bond market what won it. Bond vigilantes save the day. If you want the job doing properly, stock market can't do it. You've got to leave it to the bond guys, trebles all round kind of thing. But actually, at the same time as the bond market was in trouble, and I do suspect that someone tapped him on the shoulder and said, sir, this is quite serious. At the same time, you can see some signs of distress among his backers within the Republican Party, in American business circles that were saying, this is going to really hurt us and it's going to really hurt the economy.
Fentanyl deaths are plummeting. What's behind the decline? After more than a decade of devastating losses, fentanyl deaths in the US are finally falling. Deaths are down 25% in less than a year. But the reason why, that's where it gets weird. Some public health officials claim it's down to their treatment programs and products like Narcan. If true, this would be hugely welcome news and would mean we now have a proven strategy that can be rolled out more widely. But there are two problems. The first is that there is very limited evidence that these interventions really do move the needle. And the second is that these explanations don't fit the data. Fentanyl deaths aren't dropping randomly. They're falling in a clear pattern, spreading from the east to the west coast, exactly how the epidemic first spread a decade ago. By contrast, interventions from the government and health officials have generally either taken the form of blanket national policies or a hodgepodge of efforts at the state or local level with no clear geographical pattern. In other words, the evidence suggests that whatever's driving this trend is probably coming not from the top down, but from the bottom up, from suppliers, substances and users. There are three main theories. One is simply a fall in supply. Supply dips have also spread from east to west. Theory two is intriguing. Data shows dealers have started mixing fentanyl with a horse tranquilizer called xylazine, which delays the onset of withdrawal symptoms, so users take fewer hits, reducing the risk of an overdose. Xylazine is also thought to be a factor behind the shift from injecting to smoking fentanyl, which tends to make it less lethal. Once again, this trend has spread from east to west. The third theory is that much like with a virus epidemic, fentanyl may have simply burned through its vulnerable population. Many tragically died, and others have adapted by changing dosage or being more careful, leaving fewer people at risk of a deadly overdose today. The wave-style dynamics at work here mean it would also theoretically fit the east to west pattern. The bottom line, this huge public health win, tens of thousands of lives saved, probably has little to do with official policies.
Look, it will hurt China. There will be some effort by the US to try and source stuff elsewhere, but there's an imbalance of power here, and it's not clear that it's in the US's favor to me.
Yeah, and also politically, China is not a democracy. They are what some would call authoritarian, and they have been known to crack down on protest before. During the COVID lockdowns, they had a really draconian policy that kept people in place. And while there was some protest and some uprising, they were able to do that for a year to 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the US, if you have mass backlash, there's going to be a political effect. It's possible that, just as a populace, they're more willing to bear down. And just speaking with friends in China, there seems to be much more a nationalist sentiment of Trump is the aggressor. We as China need to band together to counter these horrible things the Americans are doing. They're trying to threaten our way of life, etc. So there's a bit of a rally around the flag here.
Yeah.
So it seems like politically they could also weather this better than the US, and economically probably as well.
So
that being said, China still has a lot of economic woes.
For sure. And it's been trying to dig itself out of a hole that's come from the kind of collapse in its property sector for a long time. But it's got a political system that can weather this. It's got an exporting and economic system that can weather this. But it's also holding quite a lot of cards in terms of markets.
If you were graduating today, would you still go into banking?
Yeah, it's a...
Yeah, not a very convincing...
Here's what's great about it. I would, but I understand why people might not want to, because there's always constantly, being attacked by various parties and sides. But the beauty about it is one of the flywheels, spin wheels that creates these great economies. It's the meeting of minds and people and capital and distribution of capital. Capital deployed the right way is meaningful. Deployed the wrong way can destroy a country. And that's not just banks. It's venture capital. It's private equity. It's hedge funds. It's all these various things and then when you wake up in the morning, you read the paper, almost everything in there is going to affect you. And people like talking to the cocktail party because what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Which is different in certain industries. They're very kind of narrow in their own industry. So it's a fascinating field, and it's high paced, it's fast, it's risky, so yeah, I would go into it, but I understand why some people say, what, give me something that's a little more comfortable.
Some economists over the past week, and particularly with the dollar also falling, have been arguing that there is a loss of faith, a loss of confidence in the U.S. How worried are you about that? And do you agree?
The U.S. is still the most prosperous nation the world's ever seen. It's still a haven because of that strength, the rule of law, the strength of America's economy, innovation, the growth. The United States military, which not just protects America, protects a good part of the Western world. So it's still very strong. But yes, a lot of this uncertainty is challenging that a little bit. So you can be reading about this nonstop until hopefully these tariff and trade wars settle down and go away, so people can say, I can rely on America. So I wrote, in my letter, I wrote, America first is okay, but not America alone. And so if you talk about, I'm not worried about the markets as much as I am about keeping the Western world together, free and safe for democracy. And that, to me, means you want to strengthen the economic relationships. If there's unfairness, deal with it. But yeah, we should be careful. I mean, I don't think anyone should assume they have a divine right to success and therefore don't worry about it.
So you can't take it for granted?
I would never take anything for granted, no.
Markets around the world have been in a spin ever since Donald Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs on April the 2nd. Stock markets around the world took a big hit and the oil price slumped as investors braced for a potential global recession. But a few things stick out here and they're really important. First of all, not all markets are doing quite as badly as the US. Quite a few in Europe, for example, are still up on the year. Secondly, the dollar is falling. And thirdly, and this is really important, US government bonds, which are normally a thing that do really, really well in a crisis because they're risk-free and they're a haven, they're not doing their normal thing. This tells you a few important things. First of all, investors think the US is the problem. Second of all, these weird patterns in the dollar and in US government bonds tell you that the US is not quite the safety valve that it used to be in the global financial system. So this is not just a market shock. Potentially, this is a start of a reordering of the entire financial system.
Should we be concerned that we're getting back to the sort of world that blew up it's not much less than 20 years ago now, with all this, all sorts of innovations, private credit, private equity businesses are really now, it seems to me, huge banks. The legitimization of cryptocurrencies, which were created out of thin air and are now supposedly part of the national reserves of the US, should we be worried about this or not?
Well, I think we should, because when you go back to 2008 and the financial crisis, one of the big practical questions was which banks should have access to liquidity from the central bank. Now, I think the big question facing governments and central banks today is which financial institutions they proposed to intervene and help if they get into trouble. On banks now, it's not just, hedge funds or private credit. It's also insurance companies or pension funds. It's a big question. And I think the dividing line between those institutions to which the government is prepared to lend liquidity support and those to which it's not is going to be the big issue in financial policy in the next 25 years.